This video is a timeline of the layoffs in Meta from 2022 to the end of 2025. But this isn't just a story about job cuts, it's also about how the massive shift in rationale for these layoffs has been damaging to former staff. For anyone building a career in the tech industry, it's important to understand what's going on here. You need to see how the leadership story went from accepting full responsibility in 2022 to squarely placing the blame on employees in 2025. Was that justified? Stick with me and judge for yourself. The starting point for the layoffs goes back to the COVID pandemic when Meta ballooned its headcount. They went from 48,000 employees in March 2020 to 87,000 in October 2022. That's a near doubling in 2.5 years. This growth in its workforce was mostly a reaction to the world moving online during the pandemic. The surge in online activity led to corresponding growth in revenue for not just Meta, but many tech companies. And many CEOs, including Mark Zuckerberg, believed that this acceleration would be permanent and continue after the pandemic ended. Now, plenty of observers didn't think so. Who was right? Well, COVID ended and the online boom subsided, as did Meta's revenue. And so came the first of a wave of layoffs. And this first wave, in November 2022, was massive. It was the first broad job cut since Meta's founding in 2004. It came with a public admission from Zuckerberg that the company's assumptions of limitless growth had been a complete miscalculation. The Meta CEO wrote in the company blog, "I got this wrong, and I take responsibility for that." And the numbers? He wrote, "I've decided to reduce the size of our team by about 13% and let more than 11,000 of our talented employees go." Those are big numbers. But also, remember the word talented. It said to the world that these were good people. That's the best case scenario for the people affected. The leader takes the strategic hit. It protects the reputation for those who have to leave. And while I think this was a good framing for the layoffs, Zuckerberg did conveniently fail to mention some other reasons beyond the end of the pandemic. There were two elephants in the room. First, the unstoppable rise of TikTok, which was eating Facebook's lunch in terms of attention and engagement. Second, the incredibly expensive pivot to the metaverse. Those numbers are just wild. Reality Labs, the division behind Meta's virtual reality platform, posted a 13.7 billion loss in 2022 alone. Remember Horizon Worlds? No? Well, it's still around, but let me remind you. This was the virtual reality platform we were all supposed to live in, with no legs. And I don't mean the platform didn't have legs, which it didn't, but also we, the avatars, didn't have legs. It was very strange. Let's acknowledge the admission of fault as being good, empathetic leadership. But that empathy, it disappears really fast. Moving into 2023, the narrative flips. Zuckerberg dubs this the year of efficiency. No apologies now, no more looking back. It's all about optimizing the future through restructuring. In March of 2023, Zuckerberg announced an additional 10,000 layoffs. And more than that, the company closed 5,000 open roles. These layoffs were in phases. With open roles not being filled, that meant less recruitment needed, so recruitment went in March. Then technology and engineering in April. And finally, business and administration followed out the door in May. If you're wondering why it was drawn out like that, it's often about managing optics. Another single giant cut could spook the market and panic shareholders. For employees, however, it just creates this prolonged anxiety. Everyone's wondering if they're next. So no apology this time, no mea culpa. These layoffs are framed as a strategy of getting to a leaner organization. And Mark Zuckerberg was very vocal in an all-hands meeting about who was in the crosshairs. He said, "I don't think you want a management structure that's just managers managing managers, managing managers, managing managers, managing the people who are doing the work." What? Is he glitching? No, he's talking about middle management. Meta was a little more quiet about shutting down whole initiatives. For example, they canned the new product experimentation group. This was an in-house incubator for new apps. Looking back on it from the outside, I think their brief was primarily to get a TikTok killer. They didn't, so the entire unit was shut down. In October 2024, Meta initiated a series of smaller layoffs in several key departments. That included WhatsApp, Instagram, and Reality Labs. Given Reality Labs' 13.7 billion loss in 2022 alone, not so much of a surprise. Again, this wasn't about the people. It was targeted at specific areas that weren't generating revenue. The stated reasons were pretty typical for a large corporation: People were let go to, and I quote, ensure resources are aligned with long term strategic goals and location strategy. Blah blah, boring, but no blame. But that approach was going to change drastically in 2025. We had the year of efficiency. 2025 was the year of blame your own people. Up until now, Meta had blamed layoffs on difficult economic conditions, some poor strategy, and a desire for greater efficiency. The company started 2025 with a different message. This time, the fault was all in their employees. In January 2025, Mark Zuckerberg sent out an internal memo to warn that the company was gunning for, and I quote, low performers. His words, the numbers were stark. The target was 5% of the workforce. That's about 3,600 employees. Now, the thing about performance ratings is that they are usually finalised at the end of a year. Sure, there may be quarterly check-ins, but the final rating is for that annual bonus. That wouldn't work for Meta's 2025 plans, given that we're in January, so they rolled out an immediate performance review process. The first round of these so-called low performers got notifications of layoffs on the 10th of February. Let's consider the consequences of how these layoffs were framed. From Meta's perspective, benefits are huge. They can keep cutting costs without admitting their core strategy is struggling. Second, it sends a clear, intimidating message to the remaining workforce. Perform at an insane level or you're next. So that's good for the company, but it's a double blow for the employee. Previously, Zuckerberg had referred to how they were letting go talented employees. Again, quotation marks. This time, using the term low performers, he slams the professional reputation of thousands of employees. Now, you might be thinking, well, low performers really should be out the door, and there has to be a measure with tiers in the bottom bucket. But that bottom bucket really shouldn't grow unless the hiring process is not fit for purpose. So here's what happened next. Suddenly, a whole load of employees get worse. Half-year appraisals were approaching in May 2025 when Meta sent a memo to its managers telling them to shove more staff into the below expectations bucket. This bottom tier was about 12 to 15% at that time. Now, managers were told to get 15 to 20% into the bucket. Somehow, the performance of a large tranche of people who met expectations must suddenly drop or be judged to have dropped. And the company wasn't subtle about this. The memo referred to an opportunity to make exit decisions. Now, this wasn't the first time Meta had moved like this. They did something similar at the end of 2022. Managers were told to increase the low performance numbers from 12% to 16.5%, and then that threshold was corrected downward again, until now. You thinking the game might be a little rigged? Some employees thought so. They revealed in internal forums that they had been rated highly in prior appraisals, and they brought the receipts. They posted their appraisal documents into internal forums. This sudden and surprising drop allowed Meta to meet its layoff targets, but also makes a bit of a mockery of their appraisal process. Okay, so let's move on to October 2025. In a move that caught few by surprise, the company targeted its risk assessment division for layoffs. This was a unit that was set up when Meta was fined $5 billion by the FTC for violating consumer privacy. This was the infamous Cambridge Analytica scandal that broke in 2019. Facebook let an app harvest user data for various nefarious purposes. Employees in the risk assessment division checked that the company's products and services meet global regulations. Who still needs that? Not Meta. They let a lot of those employees go. Company line is that they can use AI to perform these checks, so many of the jobs are now automated. And here's one that did catch me by surprise. Not even the AI jobs were safe. In October, Meta announced layoffs in their AI division. This was 600 people in teams involved in AI infrastructure and fundamental research. Interestingly, one team was left untouched. The TBD lab, where Meta placed the AI staff they recently poached from other companies using huge salaries. I guess Meta figured that it might be a deterrent for more poaching if they were a total revolving door. Chief AI Officer Alexander Wang explained that reducing the AI team means that each person will be more load bearing and have more scope and impact. Load bearing? Good grief. What's that load you're bearing? Just the work of the people who were just fired. As I've laid out the progression of the layoffs here, I hope it's clear that the company's framing on performance cannot apply to so many people, and they just keep adjusting that low tier threshold as it suits them. Meta's layoffs are a bet that AI can slash costs by replacing employees. In my view, they should just say that's the reason. And what about the impact on the people? Now I'm going to hand over to the career coach on this channel. That's Kyle. He's going to take a look at this from the lens of managing your own career.
Thanks, Margaret. So, in summary, Meta shifted the narrative on why people were let go. In 2025, they've put the blame for layoffs on the employees. They gave the label of low performers. If you're having to explain your layoff in interviews, prepare in advance how you will reframe the picture, but as briefly as possible. Counteract the stigma with fact, mention that 5% cuts were mandated, and a huge number of people were caught in the net. If most of your team was culled, say that, then quickly move to focus on your accomplishments.
And what about people still with the company?
Well, it's clear that the company manipulated performance ratings to hit layoff targets. Good work wasn't enough for some to keep their jobs.
What's a good strategy here?
Even more so now, you need to broadcast your strengths and successes. Make sure that your manager knows your wins and that they are constantly documented by you. That can be a monthly email with bullet points of what you delivered.
What about people currently thinking about applying to Meta?
If you're looking for stability, it isn't the best choice at the moment.
Sure, but some things still haven't changed. Meta still has very exciting projects that impact the world, and they still pay very well.
Meta isn't a monolith. They're cutting in some areas but are aggressively hiring in others. But remember that quote about load bearing and having more scope and impact? In other words, expect the work to be intense.
If someone does take a chance on Meta and is later let go, what can they expect in terms of a layoff package?
To date, Meta has been generous in their severance. U.S. employees got a severance package of 16 weeks of base pay plus 2 additional weeks for each year of service. They also got health insurance coverage for 6 months.
Yeah, worldwide it's reported as being pretty similar. They've been consistent.
That's a better cushion that you'll get with some other employers.
So if you think that few places are safe for longevity,
In that case, Meta becomes a reasonable choice.
if you're a software engineer and thinking of applying to Meta, check out our video on how your title or grade will translate. And best of luck out there.